Okay, welcome everybody out there watching and everyone here in the Kairos office to the first of 5 webinars that we're doing. So the Kairos Center, we're celebrating this year our 5th anniversary. There's 15 years that we've been the Poverty Initiative, and over those years we've done incredible work, helped to develop a really remarkable group of leaders all across this country who have engaged in some of the most important work to build a movement to end poverty in this country, including being very important to the work of the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival, but also have published all kinds of amazing resources and helped to lead schools. And so just to kind of mark that history and our anniversary, we decided that we would do this series of webinars to kind of highlight some of those leaders and struggles and kind of key concepts that we've helped to think about together over the years. And of course, we are hoping to raise money as well. So if folks are interested, there's a way to donate. That's just part of what we have to say, of course, and we hope that people will consider donating to keep all this amazing work continuing to happen. If you look on the webpage for the live stream, there should be a place to click through, or you can also visit the website. Okay, so just to get started with our first webinar, we have today the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis and Willie Baptist, both of whom were helped to start the Poverty Initiative 15 years ago and have been involved in anti-poverty movement building work for much longer than that. So we're very honored to have them sit down with us and share a little bit about their knowledge and history. Yeah, so the format will be, we'll just talk a little bit and hear a little bit from Willie and Liz, and then maybe towards the end there'll be a moment or two where we can get some feedback from those watching online. So thank you, Liz, Willie, for being here.
Good to be here, right?
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah. What I wanted to start with, sort of the theme, I think, of this webinar, we thought would be this kind of idea of the poor organizing the poor. And I know that both of you have a lot of experience with this work of organizing the poor organizing the poor in the U.S. And so maybe each of you could just say a little bit about that history and kind of what you mean by the poor organizing the poor, and why you feel like it's an effective model to sort of deal with what we're dealing with here in the U.S. today. So I don't know, maybe Liz, want to start, or Willie?
Yeah, I think to understand really the significance of the poor, the emerging struggles of the poor and their efforts to unite, and how we evolve out of those emerging struggles. I think it's best to understand the context, because I think that the context is suggesting era in world history and American history that is profound. And I don't think we can fully appreciate the significance of the origins of the Kairos Center and the Poverty Initiative unless we understand that context. The context is that since the mid-70s, there's been this tremendous, unprecedented, and comprehensive technological revolution, a microelectronic revolution that's even verging on increasing advancement in terms of artificial intelligence. And these things are shaping the economy and therefore are the life of the whole society, not just domestically, but also worldwide. And of course, given the nature of our system, a system that produces poverty is a system that produces profit on the one hand and poverty on the other. And even lately, the really emergence of in the richest country in the world of the growth of homelessness and so on, that these are the conditions that is giving rise, and they're still unfolding, and it needs changing. There's no reason why we should have the kind of homelessness and poverty when you have a country, an economy that's reached a level of productivity where those things don't have to happen. Yet the way this economy is organized, is organized for profits and money for a few, and wealth is being concentrated in few. And I think, in terms of this context, I think Reverend Dr. King was very appreciative in his statement that we are in a period of a very cruelly developing system that is bringing more and more people into poverty, and the struggle becomes to get them to take action together, to move this country, to move the rest of the population, so as to move the country. So anyway, it was in this context that the origins of the Kairos Center took place. Both myself and Liz was involved in different levels with the National Homeless Union Organizing Drive for about 10 years. It was a series of synchronized national housing takeovers, where at one time we had something like 73 cities that was involved with the Take Off the Board campaign. As part of, those campaigns were used to build the homeless union and to spread its influence. And so it was a very rich period of experience. We got a lot of anecdotes and lessons that we draw from it. And we carry those lessons forward into where we are right now. And this is the footing of the work of the Kairos Center. We've now, the people that we've known over the years, we've become connected with them in a broad poverty scholars network that we call, in which the Kairos membership exists within. Our members are now pastors and associate pastors of churches throughout the country. They're very much involved with the Poor People's Campaign. And the idea of building a movement in this period where poverty is in the midst of plenty is becoming the defining issue, that the questioning of the Poor People's Campaign and using that to carry out our central mission of developing religious leaders and community leaders who are committed to building such a movement, led by the poor as a united force across color lines and every other lines of division. We've been committed to that for a long time. And now that the Poor People's Campaign is taking I would say flight. I mean, things are really, people are responding. It's clearly an idea whose time has come. And the Kairos member and our network, our Poverty Scholars Network at large, are placed in a very important position in this struggle. And we're committed that this thing is successful and that we do, in fact, unite the poor and dispossessed. So that this country, with its tremendous capabilities, can live out the true meanings of its creed. We're all created equal, and we're endowed by our creators with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is what we're pursuing. That which is on paper has to be put into practice. And that's what we intend for it to happen. And that's the whole A and Z of the Kairos Center and its membership and its commitment.
So, just to add a little bit to what Willie was talking about, I mean, when we look at what's happening in the world today, and in this country, the Mailman School of Public Health, at Columbia University, right across the street from where we are right now, estimates that basically 250,000 people die every year because of poverty. And that is more than people who die from heart attacks, strokes, and cancer combined.
And wars.
And yet there isn't the kind of national outcry. Yet poverty as an issue is relegated to, basically completely ignored. And what we've seen is what's happening now, and what's happened throughout history is that those whose lives are being cut short, and those who have people who are dying from poverty and are rising up. And as we've said, over the years, in the mission of the Kairos Center and the Poverty Initiative is that those who, are most impacted, people who have very little or nothing to lose from changing the current system, in the words of Frederick Douglass, those who would be free must strike the first blow, right? And so when you look at history and you look at social change, that it's when those that are most impacted, band together with other people, and build a movement. And so I think, really what's at the center of the work that we're doing here is learning and sharing lessons of poor people organizing other poor people, and poor people organizing a movement that can help to lead everybody, right? And again, that's true not just in this country but worldwide. But from the homeless encampments and from the low-wage worker organizations and from the folks that are having family members that are dying because of the lack of health care, a movement is growing, and we're really excited to be able to then help pull those different struggles, those different organizations, those different leaders, into this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, to be able to, help to catalyze a larger movement in this country. And there are just a lot of lessons from the folks that we're working with currently and out of the context that we're in, and that have real lessons to share for how we bring about real change in this society.
Yeah, no, I feel like one of the things you've said is sort of, the way that poverty just isn't really discussed in the kind of national discourse, and I feel like a big part of what the campaign is trying to do, and what we've trying to do for a long time as a network and as a organization is to kind of break through these narratives around poverty and the poor. And there was something that I was rereading one of the chapters out of Pedagogy of the Poor, just kind of thinking about this conversation, and there was one thing that caught my eye that you all wrote. You said the wrenching conditions of economic and social crises and the practical struggles in response to these conditions compel, especially those in battle, to question their deeply held beliefs and habits. And I think in that part you were sort of talking about education and leadership development, and just, in another way you said that that this is a movement that's going to be led by the poor and the insights of the poor, but in a way it's not just because people are poor that they're leaders, but because of the experience puts them puts people in a place where they're, what you're told about who is poor, what you're told about poverty and why is poverty, all of those sort of ideological and messages that you get are sort of, they lose their weight and their truth, and you're sort of open to new thinking. Cool.
No, so a couple of thoughts that come to mind. So one, like Willie was talking about this organizing drive of the National Union of the Homeless. Now, when I first got involved in the National Union of the Homeless in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Delaware Valley Union of the Homeless, I had just started college, and I started to use a computer. This is back in the dark ages, right? And so one of the things that was true is that when I typed in the word homelessness into my computer, spell check didn't know the word homelessness. That now homelessness is a reality that people accept as inevitable, accept as ever present. But there was a time in the 80s and 90s when economic homelessness, people becoming homeless, whole families being thrust onto the street because even if they were working, they couldn't afford to keep a roof over their head, or there weren't jobs for people to be working to be able to stay off of the street, right? But that hasn't always been, right? And then what compelled people to engage in the Union of the Homeless and that homeless organizing wasn't just a good idea, but people were compelled out of the necessities of keeping their families alive and safe, right? And so what the Homeless Union got known for doing was these housing takeovers, where we would move families and ourselves back into houses that people were evicted from. And when we did that, that wasn't us just coming up with brilliant, radical tactics. It was what homeless people were doing ourselves in response to eviction, in response to homelessness. And so what the Homeless Union did was kind of organize and politicize. But so again, it kind of speaks to the idea that the leadership of the poor isn't just an idea. It's because people were looking for, creative solutions to the problem that folks are faced with. and you were willing to kind of think out of the box and be compelled to do something that was illegal, that was, perceived as a little bit dangerous, right? Because, but folks, you have nothing to lose, but like already something that's been taken from you, which is housing. Like, so if you're moving back into a house and you're being arrested for being poor and living on the street anyways, so then moving into a house that you might be able to stay in and be, like is in some ways just, what you need to do. And so I think that this offers something though, in terms of, social change and lesson for social change, which is, again, poor people aren't in the lead of a movement to end poverty just because it sounds nice, but because, only those in pain know when their pain is relieved, and folks that have little to gain from the current system and therefore aren't so worried about breaking the rules and aren't so worried about because already the rules are breaking them.
But those same conditions not only affect their thinking about themselves and about society, but also their movement began to affect society at large, because the stereotypes that explains erroneously their existence began to be challenged, because it's clear that people are not homeless or poor because of their laziness, their ineptness, and stuff like that, because you have a growing number of people who are beginning to fight. So it's not just their plight, but it's the plight that gives rise to the necessity of a fight. And that fight began to impact the consciousness of the people. And we can see that in history, like, for example, the slaves, they couldn't accept the deteriorating and excruciating condition of slavery. They began to rebel. And history says that when you push those that are most affected, like Reverend Liz Theoharis has pointed out, history says they're brought to the forefront, they're organized, and they're made conscious. They can then move the rest of society. And so the rest of society began to understand that these stereotypes and misconceptions are what they are, misconceptions and untruth. Once they begin to hear the real truth, they break with this false sense of security that they really have, because the system can affect me today, but it can affect you tomorrow. The slogan that came out of the homeless union organizers was, you're only one paycheck away from homelessness. And conditions are proving that. You're one healthcare crisis away from homelessness and poverty. And so we're evolving a struggle to answer that question, and the possibilities of having a better society with because of the tremendous productive capacity. Productive capacity that does not result in the ending of these excruciating pains like poverty and lack of health and these kind of things, but a society that has the ability to have all those things abolished. I mean, we have the capability. There's no reason why people should die from homelessness. An attack on one is an attack on all of us. History says that if we build such a unity, we can win. It's not impossible. And so I think that this is this question of political education and changing people's minds and what conditions minds are changed is something that has to be understood. And this also raises the question of stage of development in terms of people changing their mind. And every successful campaign or every successful movement in history has started with the organizing of the organizers, identifying the leaders, people who are asking deep questions because of the conditions. They're asking much deeper questions, and they are the people who are open to a deeper understanding and also to take on the responsibility of educating the rest. And so our mission, the mission of the Kairos Center, and coming out of the experience and mission of the Poly Initiative, is to develop religious and community leaders who are committed to bringing about this change through the leadership and the struggles and organization of those who are at the bottom. And it's no easy task. They're very formidable and powerful forces who have a vested interest in the economic status quo, the very status quo that's killing us, that we have to confront them. And they are no joke. They are very intelligent, and we have to meet their sophistication with our sophistication and education of the leaders, especially, but the education of the whole of the masses of people to the possibility and necessity of a new society is something that we've taken on as a commitment. And that takes training and education and that training and education requires, summing up of experiences in pamphlets and so on. So some of the things that we produce, say, coming out of the Homeless Union, there's several pamphlets, but two are important, ones you suggested. The 5 ingredients in terms of things that are necessary when you're considering organizing a movement. That's a more strategic conception of the poor organizing poor. And then tactically, the 6 Panther Ps. Now, just to give you an example of what those 6 Panther Ps, I'll just focus on that for the moment. Okay. Our struggle to organize the homeless population in the late 80s and 90s, we began to notice a parallel with the development of the Black Panther Party. Like most people think, a lot of people have made to think that the Black Panthers is about Black people, fighting white people, but that's not what they were doing. They were dealing with the unemployment at that time, especially among the youth. They was organized among poor Black youth, and their work was became example and inspired the formation of other organizations of the poor in various other communities. In the society, United States, the society being a very, very segregated society. So you had poor organizing along the similar lines of the Panthers, the the Brown Berets, within the Chicano community, or the Young Lard within the Puerto Rican community, or the Young Patriot in the poor white communities. And many of these groups later on united with Dr. King with the initial effort to form the Poor People's Campaign. But anyway, the Panthers experience was very, very instructive for us. And we saw that in our experience, the things that they did, they were able to organize themselves in a certain way that as the struggle broke out, they was able to absorb membership growth. They was able to absorb people who were fighting the police and fighting the economic conditions. The police relationship was connected to the economic deprivation and unemployment that exists, particularly among the Black youth, upwards of 50, 60, 70% unemployment in these ghettos. The ghetto uprisings of the 60s encompassed over 300 cities, and it was described as the largest and violent and mass upheavals since the Civil War. So it was a major development. Now those conditions are beginning to happen more in the brown communities and also the white slums. So in the conditions within the Black ghettos are even gotten worse. So you're dealing with very explosive times. So the use of the Black Panthers experience is very useful. For example, the need to have at the center of your organizing political education, constantly educating people so they can learn from each other and learn from their experience and learn who they're up against, because you're dealing with forces that don't want you to succeed. And their interest is that you don't succeed, and they're very intelligent. And so you have to have a political education process so you can develop the sophistication to deal with that. Another example of a P is the project survival. If you're dealing with people who are hurting on a day-to-day basis, and poverty is everyday personal crisis. That's what poverty is. And so if you don't address those questions, you're not organizing among the poor. You're just not. And many people don't understand that relationship. And a lot of that relationship has been perverted by a lot of the nonprofit organizations that become just service-oriented organizations. I mean, even some of the churches, they have soup kitchens and stuff like that. But it's not tied to organizing. It's not connected. But the potential for organizing, places where poor and homeless people gather at soup kitchens and stuff, and developing your own soup kitchen. We used to have our food distribution. We had food distribution. We had movie nights, where people can't afford to go to movies. We created those opportunities. We had literacy projects in some of our efforts. These things put us in constant contact with the poor and dispossessed. And you got to find that out. You can't find it from a distance. You got to engage to find out. Mohammed has to engage the mountain in order to find out what are the problems that are issues and what are the problems that are non-issues. So that when you start your organizing, you start with the issues. And we have many examples and stories of what those issues started off to be, and sometimes they appear to be of no consequence. But for the people that we are organizing, it's of major consequence. Like for example, in Chicago, we start off with the tissues crises that exist within all the shelters. That you had poor and homeless men and women had to get up early in the morning from between the hours of 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. to get 5 sheets of toilet paper. And they knew that was because they lived in the shelter, and they knew they was in the shelter because they were homeless. They knew they were homeless because of their lack of jobs and so on. All those were problems, but what really agitated them, was the fact that they had to suffer the human indignities of getting in line to get 5 sheets of toilet paper. And so having an organizing drive among the poor and taking off the lessons from the Panthers and others who've successfully done some of this, you have to be able to identify those issues. You can't do it on the basis of just strictly statistical analysis of trends and so on. Those things are very important because that's the issues that you start with is just that. You don't stop there. You got to show the connections, you got to explain those connections, but you got to identify those issues. And the Panther experience really brought that out to us in terms of project survival, in terms of protests, in terms of political education, in terms of having their own press. The Black Panther press was widely disseminated, and it was a way that they talked to each other and talked to the masses of people. Now we've inherited this new era of the internet, and so the use of the internet in terms of our voice becomes important. So here is the Panthers. They use the most advanced means of communication and was able to effectively use that to organize. The most advanced means of education today, of information today, and is the internet, using the internet. So we're looking at that, and and many of the poor organizations that have been able to stabilize with regard because of their press work, they have websites. They are using through their organization, their website. You take an organization like Put People First in Pennsylvania. They have an online, offline newsletter that speaks to themselves and speaks to the population. Critical to organizing. You got to be able to communicate to each other and learn from each other and coordinate with each other. And so the Panther P that talks about press work has to adapt to these times. And we have groupings that have been able to stick and stay just about all the groupings that we know within our network, our Poverty Scholars, from program, protest, poverty survival, political education, the press work, and we have the leadership plans, leaders that are built around plans that carry out that stuff and not around individuals or personality. So we have the plans, not personality, because we learned that groupies are upset when they organize, easily upset when they are organized around personalities, as opposed to around what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. So it's plans, not personality. Those are the 6 Ps. But we're talking about building community, and these ingredients that we've identified and considerations that we've identified in terms of actually organizing from the bottom are ones of building a community, building tight relationships that has to stick and stay, the whole struggle to the end. So anyway, that's my.
So, and I'm sure we can share those resources. They're in various places in various writings that we produce through the Kairos Network, but I'm sure we can also find ways to share those if folks are interested.
Yeah, so I wouldn't mind jumping in and sharing, some other lessons kind of from the work. I mean, and kind of jumping off of the 6 Panther Ps and looking particularly at this question of protest and just how we basically, like what the role that protest plays and also what protest even is, right? Because sometimes protest is, tens of thousands of people engaging in simultaneous nonviolent civil disobedience. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's somebody coming forward and sharing their story about why life doesn't have to be this way, right? And I think, but having all kinds of expressions that how things are isn't right, and how things are isn't how things need to be, and being able to, earlier when Willie was talking about the role of poor people taking the lead in actions, it both, destroys these stereotypes of the capabilities and creativity of poor people. It destroys the notion that poverty is okay and it's something that's fine. Maybe it's a little bit unfortunate, but it's kind of inevitable and never going to be done anything about it. But the role that protest plays in destroying all of those ideas, but then also in calling people to realize that this isn't inevitable and that it doesn't have to be this way, and that it's possible to do something. And so I think that looking at the role that protest and that education, mobilization, and organization all play intertwining in the work that we're doing is really important. When you're organizing amongst people, especially poor people, we've had to come up with a number of different experiences and lessons from that. I mean, one is that poor folks, by the very nature, are resourceless, are people without many resources. And even though there are, sometimes grants you can get, or sometimes a church has a program or whatever, by and large, to find resources, to organize poor people, to try to end poverty, that it's a problem of finding those resources. But therefore, that we resolve that the resourcelessness is through people's creativity and resourcefulness, right? And so that speaks to also having people organize around what their strengths are and what they bring to the struggle, and the fact that we actually need all kinds of things. So we need some people that know how to write press releases, and we know some people that know how to do housing takeovers, and we need some people that know how to go into a church and speak to the ministers there. And that part of how you build a movement is by pulling people out and the strengths that they bring, and not trying to have some cookie cutter that everyone's supposed to fit into, and not trying to have some immovable plan that becomes more important than actually who you have. And so often, a lot of times in these kind of efforts around social change and social justice work, people are like, well, if we just had this leader, if we just had this church leader, or if we just had this person who had these skills, then we would be okay. And that, what history says is that movements and moments produce the leaders that we need, and therefore produce people with the skills that are needed. But that isn't one or another thing. That isn't that we just have to wait until these people come on board. It's that we have to use who comes forward first. Willie often tells the story that if you're on a camping trip and a bear comes to your campsite, whoever wakes up first is the leader, because that person or those people know where the bear came from and maybe what direction the bear's going in, and knows how to get the hell out of the way, right? Well, who is waking up first to this problem of poverty is who we need to bring us to the next stage of a movement. And so we can't sit around and wait for better people to come. We can't sit around and say, well, if we just had this person from this demographic, we have to use what we have, find out what strengths those folks bring, and construct, a plan of activity around, both that speak to what the problems at hand are and what are the issues people are prepared to do something around, and working with us, whatever our faults are, whatever our insecurities are, into being able to push forward and do something that's powerful. Maybe not perfect, but that can change things, and so that means really putting a premium on leadership development, really putting a premium on folks that are committed, not just for a minute, but for a movement, and then in that, people's all of the skills and all of the commitment and all of the values come forward. And then one more thing, just that I think is so vitally important, from the left. You have two concepts, especially in American thinking and American psychology. The idea of rights, like, we all have a right to water, we have a right to healthcare, we have a right to housing, we have a right to living wages, we have a right to education, right? So these are really important, like, as a concept. I mean, both because it shows a vision of where we're trying to go and not just a reaction to the negative things that are happening, but also because in American thinking is the notion of rights. I mean, again, there's this conflicted, history, but still. But then the other piece is this question of religion and morality. And what do our sacred texts and traditions say about how do you care for the poor? How do you welcome the immigrant? How do you, organize society around the needs of the least of these, which is therefore the needs of everyone, right? And so I think another really important part of our organizing model and some of the lessons that we've drawn through our work and through history is, not ceding our constitutional values and not ceding religion to hands of anyone, because when you do that, you kind of lose the battle before you even fight it.
That was going to be the last question around religion and the significance of that. So I don't know if you want to finish with just your thoughts on that. And then we got close. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to say that I think if you're going to organize and you're going to create power that really can be at a level where we can bring about changes, you've got to know the people that you're organizing, and there's different things about them, their talents and their different inclinations, their different strengths, but you got to know their personality. And the American culture, coming from the founding of the United States, is heavily religiously shaped, and a lot of people who've tried to organize have left that out. And here's an area of the thinking and beliefs and ideology that is very important to the people that we're trying to organize. In fact, the homeless, often when we organize, we often said the only thing all we have is our faith. That's all we have. And so to respect that and to know that is so important. I think this is one of the most important things that the newly reignited Poor People's Campaign has done. They've opened up the battle for the Bible. This is very important because the demographics of control in this country is such that the poverty belt, especially like in the South and some of these areas where you have growing poverty, you have a poverty belt that is kept in poverty by a Bible belt. This Judeo-Christian belief system that we have is expressed through the Bible. Is something that's been interpreted in terms of its theology in a way that justifies this relationship between the poverty belt and the Bible belt. To say this is a contradiction, in people's thinking and in the so-called pronouncement of our country. There's a contradiction here, and we need to expose that contradiction. So this battle for the Bible is very important, and we can't speak highly too much or overemphasize that fact. And I think Kairos Center, our members, are in a position to really contribute greatly to that struggle. And these 5 years that Kairos existed, and then you add the work of the Poverty Initiative, there's a lot of work that's been done on this question. And we're looking at the Poor People's Campaign and other aspects of our work. All of our work is connected. A lot of it is connected with the Poor People's Campaign, is really making this battle for the Bible a battle for changing our lives and changing this country.
No, thank you. Thank you both for taking the time. I know we could probably talk for hours more, and I would like to, because there's just so much knowledge and experience that you have to share. And I just, want to remind everyone that, the work that you all watching and everyone that's connected to the Kairos Center have been doing over the years, it really is, this education, this analysis and writing, and organizing, it is what got us to where we are today with this moment that we're in with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And so I want to, encourage us to keep doing that. And, I know we're all committed to keep it on, as Willie says. But of course, we also would like to, if people are interested in donating, to remind you all that you can go to kairoscenter.org to help continue support all this.